in Ireland, obviously, they wouldn't have got awards, but they didn't get the awards from the British system gave them awards, and you definitely had to earn it if you were an Irishman in the British system. You had to be an exceptionally brave person to get an award in the British Army in the First World War. And it was amazing that so many of the Kieran White and his brothers were able to go out of Banagher and to come back alive. That's what amazed me.
Well, he went to war with 8 of his brothers, and they all came back together, and just 3 of them remained in Banagher, and before they all got married or went to war, they lived in a small little house just down across from the Kids National School, which is demolished now.
This house was built by the English government for the men that gave their lives and that for Great Britain.
Growing up, I suppose, with them here in the house, he was always here. He was very good to us. He used to help with dinner and get dinner ready.
He was a family man, and like everybody knew him as Kieran White, and everybody respected him and had great time for him, and he may just take a trip downtown on a Saturday night, and that would be it. You know, he'd be with his family and grandkids that lived with him, you know.
Well, my memory days with my father, God be with him, we had great days, the whole family, and especially on the bog with my daddy, my brothers, Sarah and Kieran.
I remember asking him once why he had joined, and he said that it was for economic reasons, really, that there was no work in Ireland at that time, and in the early 1900s, Ireland was a very, very poor place to be living in, and those who could get out, got out.
I'd say at the time for work reasons and, you know, for families to be looked after and things like that. I'd say that's why they joined the army early. Yeah.
The British system was running in Ireland, and it was what was running the show here in Ireland. Now, there was nationalists, and the nationalist movement was a kind of run by John Redmond, who was an MP, and he was based obviously in Dublin. And they wanted home rule. They were fighting for home rule from England. And it was passed in Parliament that they'd give them home rule, but it was suspended for a year until the war would be over. But this was a way of getting people to join. They thought then they were going to have their own independent state, kind of, you know what I mean? And then when Germany invaded Belgium, it was a small little nation, and everyone was saying, oh, poor little Belgium. And it made people sad and sorry, and you know, there was a patriotism in the Irish system.
Well, I'd say back then that there wasn't really much going on around the town, and there was nothing else to do. So I suppose they got together, him and his brothers, and decided, well, maybe they'd take it. Just go ahead and join.
And they should have been proud, and I think they should have been proud for what them soldiers done, because them soldiers weren't doing it for the king or for country or anything like that. They were doing it because Ireland was in a terrible state in 1913. Young lads joining the army now are also joining for the travel. People joined the British Army for economic reasons, but also to see the world. They were going to different places and they were going to travel. It was the only chance they were ever going to get of travelling. And there were all Irish regiments, don't forget. There weren't British regiments as such. There were Irish regiments in the British system, but there were the Connaught Rangers, the Irish Fusiliers, the Royal Dublin Fusiliers. They all had different areas in Ireland. All had their own regiments. Out on the Battle of the Somme and out in France in the trenches, and an awful lot of them died.
He went. He was sent to a lot of different countries. Like he was in India. He was in Turkey, I believe.
Burma. In France, that's right.
Wherever he travelled, wherever he went, I think he was in Turkey as well. I know at one stage he was a prisoner of war for a while, and then he never really told you anything of what really went on in the war. I think it was like that he rather forget things, and when he came home from war, that he'd be able to have probably a normal life rather than thinking back to what went on.
Kieran White, he was he didn't talk much about his experiences in the army. None of the soldiers of that time did, because they had seen so much horror, the horrors of war, that they didn't want to talk about. If they could forget about it, they would, but I'm sure at night it came back to haunt them. After being in the First World War, with a shell going off beside you, I was in the Irish Army myself for 25 years, and I was up in the Glen of them all firing these shells and 25-pounders and 18-pounders. And I can just imagine them going off beside you all day.
Obviously, I mean, war at that stage had to be very tough. It's tough at any time, I know, but back in the First World War, I'd imagine things were very bad, so you would be proud if they would have lived quite a harsh life in trenches and things like that.
This was Kieran White's medal roll index card. Kieran White's Distinguished Conduct Medal.
I had heard that he had got the DSM award anyway for bravery and gallantry, and he said that when the bombs were being fired at him in the tunnel trench in France in November 1917, that when the bombs were coming in towards him, he caught them and threw them back.
There was only man when he was in the trenches, and the Germans lobbing in all that bombs, going along and picking them up in his bare hand and throwing them back to the Germans.
I remember the story being told to me about a young fellow that was beside my grandfather, and he was crying for his mother, and there was a trench dug nearby, and my grandfather threw him down in it because he knew how scared the young fellow was.
I'd be very proud. I mean, to save lives is a great thing. It's it's a great honour for anybody to be able to do it, to save lives.
He was a man that wouldn't step back from anything. He kept forward the whole time, and then the bomb the German dropped in, he dropped it back to them. And he got a letter from King George.
From King George, yeah, to Kieran White, yeah.
He received, I think it was because himself and his 8 brothers, 9 of them went to war, 9 of them came home, and I think it was more recognition for him and his family and his parents as well, more or less kind of thanking them for their services in the war.
They thought they were going to free little Belgium or whatever and to fight for freedom. But when they came back here, after the big war was over, it was completely changed. The political system here had changed completely. 1916 had happened, and now the British soldier was coming back and he was being spat on for fighting a cause, an English cause, whilst Ireland was in the bondage of England and having no freedom. And it totally, once the British government then sanctioned the execution of the 1916 leaders, that totally changed people's view against Britain. They must have lived very quiet life. They didn't want to make, that's why they never spoke about their war. They never spoke about it. Didn't want to be known as heroes because they knew nobody looked on them as being heroes.
He worked, obviously he worked on the council, I think, and he worked in the Wallard's Mills and that as well for a few years, and then obviously married and had family himself then. Yeah.
My grandfather married Bridget Belong, and Tom married Frances Belong. Two brothers married two sisters. They lived side by side, and when they passed away, they're buried side by side. He also had a brother, Bill, and he lived in the town as well. And that was three. He had a brother, Jack, that moved to Tipperary, and he had a brother, Jimmy, that stayed in Ireland also. So that was five. So the other four went to England, and that was the end. They were never heard of after that. And his eldest daughter passed away when she was 18 years old, and which TB was very bad at the time. It's such a disease. It was really bad. There was no cure whatsoever. But he was very caring to his family, and he looked after them. And I remember so clearly the day he died. It was the 4th of November.
The 4th of November 1975, yeah. It was on a Tuesday, because it's actually quite strange that we're doing this today, and today is his anniversary.
The room was full because his grandkids that lived with him, and his son Tom, and Tom's wife and all their kids, Tom's wife Maureen, and my mother, myself. We all ran for the avenue. We called it the avenue, which it was. And he had sons in England, and the sons came home, but he had one son that was the same namesake, Kieran, as him, and he was the youngest boy, you know, but he wasn't there when his son arrived, you know.
He was one of the greatest. I never had a wrong word, and he never even put his hand on this. He just worked hard for a living after the war. He lived to be 89.
You know, and I think it's lovely to think that younger generation do take interest in what has happened previously, and, you know, go on in life and think, well, at least the next generation knows something about him, that it just doesn't stop with us. You know, that my children, you know, everyone kind of still remembers him and that kind of thing.
They'll never see anything like him again anyway.